Margaret Chen had been a nurse for 28 years. At 53, she'd seen enough of life's emergencies to know that a phone call at 3 in the morning never brought good news. She reached for her glasses on the nightstand, squinting at the unfamiliar number flashing across her screen. Her first thought was the hospital. Perhaps they needed her to cover an extra shift. Her second thought was her own grown children, though they had their own lives now, their own families. "Hello?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Please?" A man's voice, desperate and breaking. "My daughter. She's burning up with fever. I don't know what to do. The pediatrician's office gave me this number for after-hours emergencies." Margaret sat up slowly, her mind clearing. "Sir, I think you may have the wrong number. I'm a nurse, but I work in cardiology at St. Mary's. I'm not with any pediatric service." There was a pause. She could hear shallow breathing, maybe even quiet crying in the background. A child's cry, weak and pitiful. "I'm sorry," the man said. "I must have written it down wrong." "I'm so sorry to wake you. Margaret should have said goodbye." She should have given him the correct non-emergency nurse line and gone back to sleep. She had a 12-hour shift starting in 4 hours. Instead, she heard herself asking, "How old is your daughter?" 7. She's 7 years old. Her temperature is 103.8. I've given her children's medicine, but it's not coming down. "My wife?" His voice caught. "I lost my wife 2 years ago. I don't have anyone else to call. Her grandmother lives 6 states away." Margaret was already getting out of bed, her feet finding her slippers in the dark. "What's your address?" she asked quietly. 20 minutes later, Margaret pulled up to a beautiful old Victorian house on Maple Street. The porch light was on, and she could see a tall figure pacing behind the front window. She grabbed her personal medical bag, something she'd assembled over the years from habit and old-fashioned practicality, and walked up the front steps. The door opened. Before she could knock, the man standing there was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with dark hair disheveled from worry and eyes red from exhaustion. He wore a dress shirt, half untucked, as though he'd fallen asleep in his work clothes. "You came," he whispered, his voice breaking with relief. "You actually came. I'm Daniel. Daniel Morrison." "Margaret Chen," she replied gently. "Now let's see about your little girl." He led her upstairs to a bedroom decorated with fairy lights and watercolor paintings. In the bed, wrapped in blankets despite the fever, was a small girl with long brown hair matted to her forehead with sweat. Her cheeks were flushed, and she was making small, uncomfortable sounds in her half-sleep. Margaret approached slowly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly. "My name is Margaret. Your daddy called me because he's worried about you. Is it okay if I check how you're feeling?" The girl's eyes opened, glassy with fever, but such a gentle brown color. She nodded weakly. For the next hour, Margaret worked with the calm efficiency of nearly 3 decades of nursing. She checked the child's temperature, examined her throat and ears, listened to her breathing. She asked Daniel about symptoms, about how long the fever had lasted, about what the girl, whose name was Sophie, had eaten that day. "It's likely a virus," Margaret finally said, straightening up. "Her throat is quite red, but I don't see the telltale signs of strep. The fever is high, but children's fevers often run higher than adults before breaking. The important thing is that her breathing is clear, and she's responding to us." She showed Daniel how to give Sophie a lukewarm bath to help bring the fever down, how to keep her hydrated with small sips of water and ice chips, when to alternate the fever medication. She stayed while Daniel gently bathed his daughter, offering quiet encouragement as Sophie whimpered and clung to her father. By 5 in the morning, Sophie's fever had dropped to 101.2. She was sleeping more peacefully, her breathing even and steady. Daniel walked Margaret downstairs, his exhaustion now mixed with overwhelming gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You didn't have to come. You don't even know us." "I'd like to pay you," Margaret raised her hand gently. "Daniel, I'm not here as a paid consultant. I'm here because a frightened father needed help and a little girl needed comfort. That's what we do for each other." His eyes filled with tears. "When my wife died, I thought I'd learned how to do this alone. But nights like this, I still feel so lost sometimes." Margaret reached out and squeezed his shoulder. Being a parent means feeling lost sometimes. It means loving someone so much that every fever feels like a crisis. You're doing better than you think. Please, he said. At least let me make you coffee before you go. It's the least I can do. They sat in his kitchen as dawn began to break outside. Margaret learned that Daniel was the CEO of Morrison Tech, a software company his grandfather had founded, that he worked from home 3 days a week to be there when Sophie got off the school bus, that Sophie loved painting and wanted to be a veterinarian, that his wife Caroline had died suddenly from an aneurysm, leaving him to navigate parenthood alone. The hardest part, Daniel admitted, stirring his coffee slowly, is that I can handle the business decisions, the budgets, the strategies. But when Sophie cries for her mother or when she's sick like this, I feel completely helpless. Love makes us all helpless sometimes, Margaret said gently, but it also makes us brave enough to call a stranger at 3 in the morning. That takes courage. As she prepared to leave, Daniel walked her to the door. Would it be all right? He asked hesitantly. If I called you again? Not for emergencies, I promise. But maybe just to thank you properly? To let you know how Sophie's doing? Margaret smiled. I'd like that. Over the following weeks, Daniel did call. First to report that Sophie's fever had broken completely by that afternoon. Then to tell Margaret that she'd been asking about the nice nurse lady who came in the night. Eventually, he called to invite her to Sunday dinner, just as a thank you, he said. Margaret hadn't planned to get involved in their lives. She'd raised her own 2 children, watched them grow and move away. Her days were full with work and her small circle of longtime friends. She'd been content with her quiet life, but there was something about this small, grieving family that touched her heart. She came to Sunday dinner. She met Sophie properly, a delightful, imaginative child who showed Margaret every painting in her room and every stuffed animal, complete with their names and elaborate backstories. She saw how Daniel tried so hard, how he'd learned to braid his daughter's hair and pack nutritious lunches, how he attended every school event alone, taking twice as many photos to make up for the missing parent. One dinner became 2. Then Margaret found herself helping Sophie with a school project about the human body. Then she was teaching the girl how to make her grandmother's dumplings, their hands covered in flour, Sophie's laughter ringing through the kitchen while Daniel watched from the doorway with an expression that made Margaret's heart squeeze. 3 months after that first desperate phone call, Daniel asked Margaret to meet him for coffee. Just the 2 of them. I need to be honest with you, he said, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. You've become such an important part of our lives. Sophie talks about you constantly. She asks when you're coming over. She draws pictures for you. He paused, meeting her eyes. And I find myself looking forward to seeing you more than I've looked forward to anything in a very long time. Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest. At 53, she hadn't expected to feel this again, this gentle excitement, this sense of possibility. I care about you both very much, she said softly. When you called that night, I couldn't have imagined that a wrong number would lead to this. To you, to Sophie, to feeling like I have family again, in a way I didn't know I was missing. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. So where do we go from here? Margaret smiled. I suppose we take it one day at a time. We see where this kindness leads us. A year later, Margaret moved into the Victorian house on Maple Street. Sophie helped her unpack, chattering excited. On their wedding day, a small ceremony in the backyard with just close friends and family, Sophie stood between them, holding both their hands. My daddy made a wrong call, Sophie announced during the reception, with the unfiltered honesty of an 8-year-old. But it was actually the rightest call ever. Everyone laughed, but Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. Sometimes the greatest blessings in life came from unexpected places. From a desperate father's misdial, from a choice to show up when you didn't have to, from opening your heart when you thought you were done with new beginnings. She looked at Daniel, at Sophie, at this life she'd stumbled into at 3 in the morning on an ordinary Tuesday. Not all heroes wear capes, she thought. Sometimes they just answer the phone, and sometimes, when you show up for others in their moment of need, you discover that you were finding your way home all along.